Christopher Nolan has done it again. This time without having to douse the audience in constant action. In fact, Nolan's 2023 historical biopic, Oppenheimer, has almost no action at all, despite rumors that the often dramatic director had actually blown up a real atomic bomb on set. Spoiler alert, he didn't. Unlike the Batman films or his other World War II epic, Dunkirk, Oppenheimer is far more dialogue and character-driven. This, combined with some explosive performances, allowed it to become the first major box office hit to win Best Picture in over 20 years. But how much of Nolan's science class on steroids is actually accurate? That's the question we'll be answering in this film. Speaking of which, why don't we make a game of it? Do you think Oppenheimer is 100%, 75%, 50%, or only 25% accurate? Stick around and we'll give you the answer at the end of the video. Welcome to Movie Play, where movies under X-ray. We analyze the biggest movies and provide you with unique details, Easter eggs, and hidden meanings you won't find anywhere else. It's like putting an entire film into an X-ray machine so you can see that little parts that make it work or not work. In the case of Oppenheimer, our team watched thousands of hours of analysis to help separate fact from fiction. But first things first. Oppenheimer, as you might have guessed, tells the story of J. Robert Oppenheimer and his pivotal role in the development of the atomic bomb. Of course, depending on who you ask, the movie is actually more about how Oppenheimer chain-smoked his way through romantic entanglements, depression, and Cold War-era communist accusations than pure science.
We imagine a future, and our imaginings horrify us.
Though there's definitely some fantastic storytelling at work, it's worth noting that Nolan treats his titular character like a sort of scientific Forrest Gump, often using him as an excuse to introduce major influential minds like Albert Einstein, Niels Bohr, and Werner Heisenberg. It's basically Zoolander 2, but all the cameos are people you only vaguely remember from high school physics class. I mean, there had to be at least one person screaming,
"Here I come."
"Holy cow, that's Haakon Chevalier." Still, they weren't in the showing we saw. But just having a bunch of historically accurate people show up in a movie doesn't make the movie itself accurate. Although Richard Feynman, played by Jack Quaid, apparently did play the bongos like all the time. Before we dive into the science and history behind the movie, make sure you hit that thumbs up, subscribe, and ring the bell if you want to keep up with more videos like this. Without further ado, let's get into our analysis of Oppenheimer. Spoilers ahead, so be warned. Let's kick things off with another quiz. Can you guess which A-list actor made a promise to their significant other to take a break from movies, with one exception being if Christopher Nolan calls? Was it A. Emily Blunt, B. Robert Downey Jr., C. Matt Damon, or D. Kenneth Branagh? We'll have the answer shortly. The movie follows theoretical physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer as he's grilled by a personnel security board about his ties to communism and whether his security clearance should be renewed. Through a series of vignettes and flashbacks, we soon learn that this grilling comes courtesy of AEC Chairman Lewis Strauss, played by Robert Downey Jr. Apparently, Strauss has both a personal and professional bone to play with our hero, played by Cillian Murphy. During the interviews, Oppenheimer's past flings with a Communist Party member come up, as do instances in which he might have covered for his fellow scientists, one of whom was later determined to be a spy. Adding to the tension is the fact that his wife, Kitty, played by Emily Blunt, not only also has ties to communism, but has to sit there hearing about his affairs. The film then jumps to the race to develop the atomic bomb, where Oppenheimer, recruited by U.S. Army Colonel Leslie Groves, played by Matt Damon, heads up the Los Alamos laboratory as part of the Manhattan Project. Here he collaborates with a number of big-time scientists, including Kenneth Branagh as Niels Bohr, in a race to build the bomb before the Nazis.
It's about unleashing a strong force before the Nazis do.
Now that we've covered them all, can you guess the answer to our quiz? The answer is Matt Damon. He apparently promised his wife that he'd take a break from acting,
But if Chris Nolan were to call me,
but simply couldn't resist the chance to work with Nolan.
Our marriage is the second most important thing.
Fun fact, Oppenheimer ended up being the highest-grossing film he's ever been in. Movie buffs might remember that Matt Damon famously turned down a leading role in Avatar, which became the highest-grossing film of all time. Looks like he was set on not making that mistake again. The movie is understandably star-studded and includes some of the best character actors in the biz. Florence Pugh, in particular, received praise for her portrayal of Jean Tatlock, a psychiatrist, Communist Party USA member, and Robert Oppenheimer's romantic interest. If you squint just right, you can recognize Tom Conti, who played Judge Biggleswade in Paddington 2 as Albert Einstein. And the hits keep coming. Gary Oldman plays Harry Truman, and even Rami Malek managed to find a way into the film as experimental physicist David L. Hill. Apparently, his portrayal was so interesting that the real Hill ended up with a Wikipedia page because nobody could find enough information on him. While the film received massive praise, not everyone was thrilled. For instance, some people found the bladder-busting 3-hour runtime too much, while others thought the nudity and sex scenes dampened what could have been a perfectly educational scientific epic. It seems most critics and audiences disagreed, however, because Oppenheimer went on to win, conservatively, all the awards. Now let's dive into what's real and what's Hollywood. To do this properly, we need to give you a little bit of history on J. Robert Oppenheimer, the man. Born in 1904, Oppenheimer earned the title Father of the Atomic Bomb. Later, he would be accused of having anti-American attitudes and be stripped of his top-secret clearance. He would even go on to become a staunch opponent of nuclear proliferation. The film nails this, accurately highlighting the regret that followed Oppenheimer's part in developing a weapon capable of wiping out humanity.
Robert, try not to blow up the world.
Historians generally agree that Oppenheimer is highly accurate for a Hollywood film. In fact, many lines are lifted straight from real-life records of the book American Prometheus, which served as the primary source for the movie. Still, not everything happened exactly as shown. For instance, while the scene where Oppenheimer poisons his tutor's apple is based on Oppenheimer's own retelling of the event, but it's unclear if it truly happened. The film also overdramatizes Oppenheimer's excitement about black holes.
But if that furnace cools, when gravity starts winning, it contracts.
As he would have had no knowledge of their significance at the time. Ironically, the study was indeed released on the same day Germany invaded Poland, as shown in the film.
September 1st, 1939. The world's gonna remember this day.
You've been upstage.
The infamous Trinity test scene is mostly accurate, although the film fudges some details, like where Donald Hornig was stationed during the test. The blast did end up being much larger than expected, and some of the less brilliant people at the site did decide to look at the blast without eye protection. Ouch! As for Oppenheimer and Einstein, they were friends. But the central conversation in the film? Yeah, that's fiction. In reality, the tension between Robert Downey Jr.'s Strauss and Oppenheimer mainly stemmed from the latter embarrassing the former at an Atomic Energy Commission and the fact that they had stark disagreements on policy.
Already heard from Madam Strauss that these isotopes could be useful to our enemies in the production of atomic weapons.
Congressman, you could use a shovel in making atomic weapons.
The attack on Oppenheimer by Harry Truman, where he calls the scientist a crybaby for his regrets over bomb, is also real.
Don't let that crybaby back in here.
However, he actually said it to his staff. He did mockingly hand Oppenheimer a handkerchief, though. In terms of historical accuracy, Nolan's attention to detail is impressive. Everything from yellow stop signs to minor scientific processes is painstakingly recreated. Even Cillian Murphy went the extra mile, restricting his diet to 1 almond a day to match Oppenheimer's gaunt look. That said, the wrong American flag appears at one point. But since Nolan was born in England, we can give him a break on that one. When asked about the realism of his own film, Nolan stated that he intended for the black and white scenes to be objectively true, whereas the color ones are subjective. Now about that famous line, "I am become death, destroyer of worlds."
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
It's a chilling moment in the film, but did Oppenheimer say it during a romantic tryst with John Tatlock?
And now I become death, destroyer of worlds.
Nope. The real story is less scandalous. Oppenheimer first quoted the Bhagavad Gita in a 1965 NBC documentary, recalling the Trinity test when the line popped into his head.
And now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
So yeah, while it makes for a dramatic scene in the movie, it didn't happen quite that way. The Indian government even criticized the film for its use of Hindu scripture during an intimate scene, asking Nolan to remove it entirely.
Christopher Nolan!
Thank you. Thank you.
Again, the section of the film depicting the Manhattan Project is arguably its most accurate. The film even mirrors the actual footage of the Trinity test, capturing the eerie calm and the massive explosion. The whole part about setting off a nuclear bomb potentially causing the atmosphere to light on fire was also true, as many respected scientists felt that this was a real possibility.
It would ignite the atmosphere.
It's also true that the gadget, the real code name for the bomb, was assembled in a controlled environment with every possible care taken. Even the lighting and setting in the movie match real classified footage from Los Alamos. Of course, one of the most dramatic aspects of the film is the affair between Florence Pugh's character, Jean Tatlock, and Oppenheimer. In real life, the two were deeply involved, but their relationship ended years before the Manhattan Project started. The movie suggests that their affair continued throughout, but this is disputed by historians. That said, they did meet once in 1943, and Army security followed Oppenheimer the entire time. It's also true that Tatlock's suicide in 1944 was a major blow to Oppenheimer. The film shows this, but it's worth noting that the true nature of their relationship is more ambiguous. The primary source for Oppenheimer was the Pulitzer Prize-winning biography American Prometheus, a meticulously researched account of his life. In terms of making the film as real as possible, Christopher Nolan had an incredible advantage while filming, thanks to the wealth of recently declassified information available about the Manhattan Project, the scientists involved, and the nature of the Los Alamos labs. More importantly, the personalities and relationships of the key figures, like Oppenheimer and Groves, were also well documented. The U.S. was known to keep dossiers on virtually everyone that had top-secret clearance during those days. Creepy as it may be, this info helped the actors to bring a deep understanding of their characters to the screen. Though certain personal conflicts and scientific details are simplified for cinematic purposes, most scholars agree that the film is one of the more faithful historical biopics out there. In fact, the ripple effects seen throughout the movie, representing Oppenheimer's fear of a chain reaction, tie beautifully into the Prometheus myth referenced in the American Prometheus and in the quote at the beginning of the film.
You are an American Prometheus, the man who gave them the power to destroy themselves.
For those who don't know Greek mythology, Prometheus is a titan who steals fire and gives it to humanity, ending in a very extreme punishment. Over the centuries, he has become a symbol of sacrifice, defiance, and progress. It's not a bad metaphor for Oppenheimer, no? When you think about Oppenheimer, it's easy to focus on the bomb, the politics, and the security hearings. But what if the movie had delved deeper into the man's internal struggles, his genius, and the moral conflict that haunted him long after the atomic bomb dropped? Some argue that Oppenheimer's post-war years, where he campaigned against the very weapon he helped create, could have made an even more compelling story than High Fight to maintain his top-secret clearance.
Under current AEC guidelines, would you clear Dr. Oppenheimer today?
Instead of ending with a fictional conversation between Oppenheimer and Einstein, Nolan could have taken this opportunity to show Oppenheimer's years spent fighting for nuclear disarmament and his fears about what he had unleashed upon the world.
I have not a very good answer to this question.
Others think the biopic should have been a bit more story-driven rather than embrace Nolan's desire to constantly shift points in the timeline. After all, a story about a young man coming to invent the world's most powerful weapon could be very interesting. Let's not forget that Oppenheimer wasn't just a brilliant physicist. He was a man of deep complexity. Born into a life of privilege in 1904, he came from a family wealthy enough to collect works of art by the likes of Picasso and Van Gogh. By the age of 12, Oppenheimer was corresponding with geologists and even giving lectures. He was a rare blend of intellect and arrogance, often so full of himself that he annoyed his peers. Yet behind this bravado was a man who struggled with dark moods, isolation, and depression. This was only touched on in the current movie, but it could have been a film in itself. Then there are those who ask, what if it was a love story? After all, the film already has a heavy focus on Oppenheimer's relationships. But it doesn't tell the whole story. For instance, his wife, Kitty, was actually already married when they met. In an audacious move, Oppenheimer invited her and her husband to his ranch one summer. By the end of that summer, Kitty was pregnant and ready to divorce her husband. Still, their marriage was far from picture perfect. Oppenheimer's string of affairs, most notably with a psychologist, Ruth Tolman, were a constant source of stress. There are even rumors that one of his lovers was killed by the CIA. Ultimately, Oppenheimer leaves us with a brilliant film, but there's so much more to the man behind the atomic bomb. A man who was haunted by his own brilliance and left wondering if he had helped destroy the world. Of course, it's not exactly the sort of film that gets a sequel, so there you have it. We've explored the highs and lows of Oppenheimer, from its stellar cast to its historical accuracy. We've seen how J. Robert Oppenheimer's genius shaped the world. Also, how his personal struggles and guilt left a lasting impact on him, his family, and his relationships. And don't think we've forgotten about our quiz from the beginning. After due consideration, we've determined that the correct rating for Oppenheimer's accuracy is B, 75%. It doesn't cover everything and embellishes a bit here and there, but generally, this is far more accurate than your typical big-screen blockbuster. Now it's your turn. What did you think of Oppenheimer? Did the movie live up to your expectations? Do you have any revelations that can challenge our conclusions about its accuracy? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that thumbs up if you enjoyed this intense X-ray look at what makes Oppenheimer one of the best biopics of all time. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for our next big video. We'll see you next time on Movie Play.